To truly appreciate what was done in the previous task by adding the megaphone or telephone effect to the lead vocal distorted track, um, we have to add in some automation moves to create more realism for the effect. So in this task, we're going to be going over a bit of volume automation, mute automation, even some send automation, and some pan automation also. So pay close attention to where I'm accessing all these parameters so that you can properly implement them into your final project. So we're going to go to the EQ37 band that we added to the distorted track, so the one that has the bandpass filter, and we're going to activate the automation for one of the parameters. So let's switch over to the mix window, and you'll notice that it's right here. And for some of you, your EQ is not bypassed, so go ahead and bypass it to start off with. And then we're going to activate the automation for the bypass parameter. So what you want to do is hold down on your keyboard Control Option Command. That's the magic quick key, Control Option Command, right next to the three keys next door to the spacebar, and click on the bypass function again, or the bypass parameter again. So we click on that, and the little pop-up window comes up and it says enable automation for master bypass. So you want to hit OK, and now we're good, right? So now we know, because it's showing green there, that this parameter is enabled for automation. Now, automation hasn't been added to it yet, but we have enabled it to be automated. So we close here, switch over to the edit window, and now in the view selector, most of you are going to be in waveform, just like this, normal. What we want you to do is switch over, because we enabled the automation for the bypass parameter on the EQ37 band. You'll notice that now it appears in the list down here. So I can pull this up in the view selector for this track. So right now, and this is why it was important to bypass it to begin with, because if we zoom out, you'll notice that the track is showing you what state it's in. So it's, at this moment, it's in bypass mode, right? So because the line is all the way up, it means that it's in bypass mode. But what we want to do is travel to the, or look for that particular phrase that we were working on. So let's go ahead and find it. And I think it's right around here, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like right here. So we're going to highlight that section, and what we're going to do is we're going to open up or activate the plugin for just this section. So because this is the bypass parameter, what we're doing is activating it only for this section. So you'll notice here that if we look at the plugin, notice that it's bypassed because my cursor is past this section, or before this section it's bypassed, but when I click within the section, the EQ becomes active, right? So clicking away from the section, clicking into the section, right? So this is how you automate parameters on your plugins, right? So now we have it automated so that the plugin only becomes active during this section, right? So that's step one. Let's scroll down. Scroll down. I've already shown you all of this. Now, because we have the distorted track and the lead vocal track together, and we have already created a blend between them, what we want to do, though, is in this section we want the distorted vocal to be more pronounced than the original vocal, but only for this section. So let's go ahead again to the view selector area, and we're going to perform volume automation on both tracks. So on the original track, we're going to switch over to the volume automation. There it is. And on the distorted path, the same thing, volume automation. There it is. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn down the lead vocal 1 just a bit, only for that phrase, and I already have it here set up. So I'm going to turn it down about that much. Let's see, like that. And we're going to choose that same phrase. There. And we're going to turn the distorted one up just a bit. Now, you're going to probably have to do a couple of different passes to make sure that it works within the mix. What you don't want, so you're looking at it and you know that you've turned one up and turned one down, but the listener has no idea what you're doing in the background. What you want it to sound like is seamless, like it just goes from one section to the other and then it jumps back in. You don't want to jump in level or drop in level to take the listener's attention away. So let's see. So right there, it probably dropped in level just a little bit. That's what it sounded like to me. So I'm going to turn this one down just a little bit more to get a little more pronounced with the distortion. So that's the other thing, is making sure that the blend brings out the distortion a lot more than before. So I'm going to turn this up a little bit more. So again, bring it back up just a bit more. Right, so that's kind of the area where you want it to be, right? I'm not going to, I could get a little bit more specific, but I don't want to spend too much time on it. But you want to make sure overall that the sound is a lot more distorted for this section, and that the change in level is not apparent between the two. So go back over to the PDF, and this is what I'm showing you over here, how to do that. We then want to add a little bit more realism to this. So this task has a bunch of layers to create more realism. We want to perform mute automation on the delay 1 sends on the distorted vocal, which when we created the distorted path, we immediately muted the delay 1 path because we only want to open it for this particular section of the song, right? So we're going to come over here, and we're going to switch this over to delay 1, and you'll notice that over here it's already bypassed. So delay 1 mute. We're going to perform mute automation only for this particular section. So again, I'm going to highlight this section right there, and now it's muted over here. Look at the delay 1 send. You can pull it up if you want. So it's muted over here, but when I click into this section, it's unmuted, which means that you'll hear the delay for this section, but you won't hear the delay for this section. You want to then, now that you know that the delay is open during this section, you want to adjust the delay level so that there is a more pronounced effect for this particular section of the song. Since it's only unmuted for this section, just turn it up till you hear it pretty well within the mix, and it adds and supports what's happening during this section, right? So we'll play this back. Right, so we already hear a pronounced difference, but not in an obvious way, but a difference in frequency and in effect and in space for that particular section, which enhances the fact that the vocals are by themselves in that section. You scroll back over. We now also want to implement automation moves on the choruses for the lead vocal track to create the perception that the choruses are bigger, right? So we're telling a story with our mix, so what we want to do is to create movement within the different sections of the song, and normally the choruses are going to be a little bit bigger than the verses, right? And maybe have more effects than the verses to create that movement and to create more strength within the choruses. This isn't always the case, but These are some of the things that you can do to create more movement and to create that emotional pull on the listener. Right, so we want to first create a new effect for the lead vocal, for the original lead vocal. Right, so we have reverb 3 here, and we've given you the settings that we want you to create for reverb 3. So remember, for creating it new, you would do the same exact thing. You'd go to an empty send space on the original lead vocal, new track, stereo aux input, and just name it reverb 3. You hit enter, it's going to create that aux track for you, and what you have to do is solo save it, make sure that you insert the deverb plugin, and then input these settings on the deverb plugin. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and just look for it because I've already created the bus for it. So reverb 3 down here, so reverb 3, there it is. We'll be sending to this track over here. And what we want to do is we only want reverb 3 to be active during the choruses for the song, right? So during the verses we don't want to hear it at all, and when the choruses come in we want this effect to be active to create a different space for the choruses in comparison to the verses. So what we do now that we've created the send over here is to go over to the view selector on the original lead vocal, reverb 3, and look for the mute, because we're going to perform mute automation on this. And since we have our markers up here, we can create this rather quickly. And I'm only going to do it partially, so I'm going to grab right here and let's see, pull this down. So we're going to mute for the verses, keep it active for the choruses. Let's see here. Oops, sorry, so I actually have it backwards. I'm going to keep it active for the choruses and mute it for the verses, like that. And I'll do the one right before, just so we can hear the difference between the two of them. Right. So in the verses, there'll be, notice here that my send is muted in the verses and then active in the choruses, and then muted in the verses again. Right. So I did that by switching over to going to the send and then going to the mute automation for the send and automating it from there. Now, the next thing we want to do is make sure that the actual send level is up. Let's see here. Adjust the level of reverb 3, so there's a pronounced difference. So I'm just going to guess. Let's say right there for now. Let's see what this sounds like. So let's listen to it soloed. You feel better. Everybody's falling apart. And now have another drink, it'll make you feel better. Everybody's falling apart. It's here within the mix. Everybody's falling apart. Sounds good. So the verses feel like they're a little bit more drier, a little bit more direct, and then the choruses come in and there's this bigger space that we've added by doing this automation and by creating a new effect that's only active during the choruses for the original lead vocal. And the last thing, which I've already done, is to perform volume automation on the delay 1 send. So the delay 1 on the original vocal is going to be active throughout the whole mix. So it's going to be on the verses, it's going to be on the choruses, it's going to be all throughout the original lead vocal, but I want it to be louder for the choruses. So I go over to level, and you'll notice here that I've performed volume automation for only the choruses where it gets a little bit louder, which is why you hear also a pronounced space and a pronounced delay. So all of these things work together to create this different space between the verse and the chorus. So I'm going to play it from the middle of verse 2 and then go into chorus 1. So right away you feel that it's sitting in a bigger space. Well, actually, that would be the last portion of this particular task. In this next portion, we're going to jump into pan automation. But before we jump into pan automation, just make sure that with these exercises that we just performed with the mute automation, volume automation, send automation, make sure that you're trying to figure out where these can fit within your particular final mix project, right? How are you going to implement this stuff to create more realism, to create movement, to amplify and implement these techniques into your story in a positive way to improve your mix overall. But with pan automation, it's the same thing. It's just another layer that you can use to create movement within the mix and to create a sense of maybe width versus being more narrow, right? So when you create that movement between one section and the other, you can maybe from the verse things are a lot more narrow, and then when it goes into the chorus things split out and are a lot wider. And since you've already added some of that volume automation, stuff like that, this can help to enhance that strength by creating the perception that things are wider and bigger, right? In this case, we're going to do this to the e-guitar 2, just as an example. We're going to switch e-guitar 2 over to pan automation view. There it is. And what we're going to do is with these intro guitar riffs, what we want to do is pan these out up until where the drums come in. So if we listen to this intro riff, so right where the drums come in is where we're going to stop panning these. And what we're going to do is we're going to pan each riff, one riff to one side, one riff to the other side, and kind of play with that a little bit before the rest of the music comes in. Now, the way to do this, there's two ways to do this. One, since you're already on the grid with these particular riffs, you'll notice that if we go into grid mode up here, and we highlight according to the grid, right? So we're in quarter note. According to the grid, we'll pretty much highlight each riff pretty on point, right? And you could just highlight and then use your trim tool to pan one. And we're going to pan about 70, 75, 76%, and then grab the other one and pan up. Well, let's say you're having a hard time with the grid. There's another tool that you can use to make this happen, and this tool can come in handy for many things, right? So if I get rid of that and then come up here to the top left hand, not even corner, but it's right under where the editing tools are at, you'll notice there's this little box over here. If I hover over it, you'll notice that the name comes up, and it's called the tabbed transients tool. You want that to be active. And what that does is it uses the tab key now to, when I hit the tab key and the cursor is active on one track or multiple tracks, it's going to tab over to the first transient that it detects, right? Which is should normally be this first big one right here. So if I tab over, it's going to tab right there. So I'm going to, now that it's right at the top of this particular section, I'm going to hold Shift down and then press tab again, and each time I press tab with the Shift key held down, it's going to tab over to the next available transient. So keep tabbing till it gets to the next, to the beginning of the next riff. Let go, and then again trim down about 75, right? Then put your cursor before that section, and in this case it's not letting me because I'm in grid mode, so switch it over to grid mode, or it's a slit mode, sorry, so that you can freely put your cursor wherever you want. So put your cursor before that big transient and then hit tab again, and it's going to go to the top, and then hit Shift, tab, till it highlights the whole riff, or it goes to the beginning of the next riff, and then pan up. Right, so you can use this any number of ways, But again, I think it's obviously, if it's on the grid, it's a lot easier to just go ahead and do it with the grid on, right? So if I go to the grid, I can highlight a lot easier this way. But not everything is going to be on the grid. I'll see, so right there it didn't work very well because of what I did previously, so I could just get rid of that. Go like that, let's trim down. Go like that, trim up. That, trim down, right? Trim up. And let's listen to what this sounds like. I'm not going to go all the way, but remember, you're going up to where the drums come in. Right, so you would go up to, so right where that first kick is heard, you want to stop panning right here. So all of these riffs are going to alternate in panning, and you're going to hear that movement in your ears, and then you're going to stop right before the drums come in to create that movement on those particular tracks. Now, we'll do that, and let's keep going down, and you'll notice here that I show you an example of what it should look like when you're done. And just remember, though, that when you're panning things out, remember that if you're panning, let's say, to the right of the mix, right? So for example, this track right here is panning to the right, or this riff is being panned to the right. It means that that particular riff is going to be lower in the left-hand speaker, and it's going to be louder in the right-hand speaker. So sometimes by panning things out, it creates depth and it creates movement, but you're also introducing level changes or volume changes. So you have to be sure that you go back and you adjust your volume based on those particular changes. So let's say I go back over here, you would switch over to volume, and if you feel that you need to adjust a particular riff, then you go in there, you highlight the riff, and you turn it up, you turn it down based on what you hear with your ears, right? What you hear within the mix and what you judge to be the best level for each. But the important thing is to remember that panning introduces level changes, and you want to adjust properly depending on what you hear. Last thing we want you to do is to apply, so if you go back to pan, and we'll put E-guitar 1 to pan also, notice that I have a bunch of different panning moves that I've applied to the mix within my session, just to create some movement. But if we go right where the bridge comes in, notice that I've panned my E-guitars, both of these E-guitars, 100% to the left and to the right to kind of open up the rhythm guitars for the end of the song, where there's a lot more energy and there's a lot more things going on. So I'm trying to open up the space for things to sit in the middle and for these to kind of just complement the movement in the background, right? So I want you to perform that pan automation on these, and wherever else you think that you can perform pan automation on these particular tracks. As you see, I've gone a little bit further and done it, and there are other tracks that I've done it on. But the more practice you get in, the better you're going to get at applying it to your final project and in figuring out where is the best place to apply this type of automation into your final project.